sugya of Kiddush Hashem was one of Reb Noach's favorites. Over the years, he gave chaburas on it. This year, as we're learning Ksubis, many of you have seen the sugya of Kiddush Hashem. I thought it was appropriate just for this year. So we begin with this Gemara. Oh, actually, we began with the Rambam. Yeah, the Rambam came first. No, it was the Gemara that came first. Bo minei Ravami, ben Noach mitzuv al Kedushas Hashem, o ein mitzuv al Kedushas Hashem. The mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem is to give your life. To give your life for your beliefs, for emunah, for Torah mitzvahs. Does a ben Noach have that? A non-Jew, is he required to give his life rather than break one of the commandments, especially in the case of idolatry, and possibly more? Is he mitzuv al Kiddush Hashem or ain't mitzuv al Kiddush Hashem? Amar Abaye Toshima, Sheva mitzvahs titztavu b'nei Noach. We learned that they had 7. V'im isa tamli havi. This would be an 8th. Amalei Rava inu v'chol avizarayu. This is not a mitzvah on its own. This is really a part of every mitzvah. Or certainly in the case of Avodah Zarah, which is one of those things that are prohibited for them, since we know that Avodah Zarah carries with it the chiv of Kiddush Hashem to give your life for it, so it's not an independent mitzvah. This would be considered an accessory to the Isser of Avodah Zarah. My halacha. So one wants to know, what is the halacha? Amri de Beirav, Ksiv, Ladovra Azeh Yishlach Hashem, Yislach Hashem Lavdecha. What's that? Bavo Adoni Beis Rimon, Nishtach for Shama Vunishin al Yodi, Nishtachavesi. This was Naaman, and he said, you know, when I take the king to go worship over there, so I will make it look as if I'm bowing. I mean, I will bow and make it look as if I'm worshiping. And he said, go. Naaman was cured of his leprosy and now became a believer. But he said, you know, I'm going to have to go and accompany the king when he goes to worship. Hashem will forgive me for that. And Elisha tells him, Leich l'sholom, which sounds like he agreed. V'im yisa lo leimale. How can he tell him Leich l'sholom? He's doing something he's got to give his life for. So you see that a ben Noach does not have to give his life for this. Says the Gemara, no, habetzina habefarhesia. V'nigdashti b'soch b'nei Yisrael. The mitzvah is in public. Certainly, if a non-Jew was commanded in the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, it would only be b'soch b'nei Yisrael, which is very interesting. Rashi points this out. It would be the very same mitzvah of Igdashi B'Sol B'nai Yisrael that a Jew has, which means that he couldn't do it in front of a minyan of Jews, 10 Jews. Hear this? A non-Jew, if he would be mechuyev in the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, it would be the Kiddush Hashem of Igdashi B'Sol B'nai Yisrael, which means only in front of Jews. The mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem is doing Mekadesh Shem Shemayim in front of Jews. There would be no Jews present when he's going to worship, in his Beis Rimon there. So the Gemara does not really answer the question. The Gemara leaves it, doesn't tell us what the halacha is. The Rambam actually paskins that a ben Noach is not chayiv in Kiddush Hashem. So Tosfos here has a problem. Tosfos asks, Gemara is making it clear that the only thing that would require a non-Jew to give his life rather than transgress would be the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, the mitzvah of Nigdashti. And the Gemara isn't sure whether or not a ben Noach has the mitzvah of Nigdashti. So Tosfos has a problem with that. V'im tomer, v'chai behem b'Yisrael ksiv. V'afilu Yisrael hayem achuyev limsor atzmo afilu b'tzino im lo dichsiv v'chai bohem. The way Tosfos understands it in his kasha, really, the Torah gives us our mitzvahs. The Torah says this is right, this is wrong. You don't do what's wrong, even if it means giving up your life. This is reality. No compromises. Any mitzvah. The mitzvah should come before your life. What do you mean? Creator of heaven and earth has told you this is what you've got to do. You give your life for it. Along came the Torah and said, no, v'chai behem. The mitzvahs are made v'chai behem, to live by them, v'lo she'amus behem. Then the Torah comes back and gives the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem for those averis or those situations where you are required to give your life. In other words, in Tosfos kasha, the order of things was, the starting point is every mitzvah should require that you give your life for it. Comes the Torah and says, no, v'chai b'hem. Mitzvahs are made to live by, you don't give your life for it. And then the Torah comes back and gives us the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem with all the rules that you saw in the Rambam that we'll be reading, that tell us when you don't have to give your life. So Tosfos asks, even if a non-Jew doesn't have the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, but he also doesn't have the pasuk of v'chai b'hem. So a non-Jew should start off with the default position that any mitzvah you've got to give your life for. This is Tosfos kasha. Right? In Tosfos kasha, he's assuming that by virtue of the fact that we were commanded to do mitzvahs, we have to give our lives for every mitzvah. Just the Torah said v'chai b'hem. A non-Jew does not have that v'chai b'hem, so he's got to give his life for everything. Why does the Gemara need a mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem to require a non-Jew to give his life? Every mitzvah requires it. He doesn't have v'chai b'hem that limits it. V'lo she'yamus b'hem. So in Tosfos kasha we see it clear. We're not for v'chai b'hem, even if there is no mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem. Because we're talking about a ben Noach, where the Gemara is asking, does he have a mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem? Does he not have a mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem? And Tosfos kasha is, even if he doesn't have a mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, since he also doesn't have a v'chai b'hem, he should have to give his life for it. So the default position, according to Tosfos, is without any pasuk. By virtue of the fact that we have commandments, you give your life for every commandment. Clear? Then Tosfos answers, and the question is, what's happening now? B'yesh lomer. Dilma lo itzrich v'chai behem, el ki hechi de lo neiliv sham mitzvahs mirotzeach v'nara amarosa. V'afilu b'tzina yorek v'al yavar lo kuli yom. Says Tosfos, v'chai behem is not coming to tell us that the other mitzvahs are not, that all the mitzvahs are not machayah that you give your life. In other words, the default position is not what Tosfos thought it was. Really, without v'chai behem, you shouldn't have to give your life for all the mitzvahs. But we do find that for Avodah Zarah, for example, the halacha is that you have to give your life. You have to give your life not to worship idols. We learn that out of B'chol Nafshecha, B'chol Nafshecha. Your love of Hashem should be greater than your love of your own life. And therefore you have to allow yourself to be killed rather than worship an idol. I would have thought that you learn out of there that you have to give your life. So that's why the pasuk of V'chai Bahem tells you no. For the other mitzvahs, they're made V'chai Bahem v'lo sheyamus bahem. A Ben Noach that did not have the pasuk Uv'chol nafshecha doesn't need a V'chai Bahem to tell him that he doesn't have to give his life for it. So again, according to Tosfos Teretz, what is the default position then? A mitzvah without any other psukim. The fact that we have mitzvahs that Hashem said, do this and don't do that. Would you have to give your life for it? Now Tosfos is holding no. Tosfos is changing the default position. You don't have to give your life for it. But then we have another pasuk. B'chol nafshecha. You have to give your life up rather than worship idolatry. I would have thought that you can learn all the other mitzvahs out of there. That's why a Jew needs the pasuk of V'chai Bahem that you don't have to. A non-Jew who doesn't have V'chol nafshecha and doesn't have V'chai Bahem, there would be nothing requiring him to give his life in order not to break one of the commandments, unless he has the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem. And that's the Gemara's question. Which means that there's been a total turnaround in this Tosfos. He began with the assumption that by virtue of the fact that this is a commandment, that we were commanded by the Creator of heaven and earth to do something, we would have to give our lives in order not to transgress. And then he's got a problem. So a non-Jew should have to give his life for all the commandments. Why doesn't a Jew have to? Because it says V'chai Bahem. A non-Jew doesn't have a mitzvah V'chai Bahem. Tosfos Teretz is, no, that's not right. The fact that it's a mitzvah doesn't require you to give your life for it. But since I do find in the mitzvah of Avodah Zarah that you do have to give your life for it, I would have learned out of there that you have to give your life for everything else. Says V'chai Bahem, you don't. That's all. That entire collection of drushes was only for Jews. Whereas the non-Jew doesn't have B'chol Nafshecha. Without B'chol Nafshecha and without V'chai Bahem, he doesn't have to give his life for any mitzvah, unless he's mitzvah in Kiddush Hashem, and that is the Gemara's question. So you got it then? It turns out that Tosfos did a turnaround. In his kasha he held that every mitzvah should logically require that you give your life for it. And then he changed. And said, no, it's not that one. Said, no, every mitzvah does not require that. We're commanded, yes. Who says you have to give your life for it? Interesting. Something so basic, and Tosfos does not explain to us what changed. He begins with the assumption that you have to give your life for every mitzvah, unless taught otherwise, and turns around and says, no, it's not so. The fact that it's a mitzvah doesn't mean you give your life for it. You don't need a V'chai Bahem to teach me that you don't have to. No. A mitzvah is a mitzvah, you gotta live. We understand that the arithmetic of the Gemara, the cheshbon of the Gemara, requires that we follow Tosas Teretz, but something so basic, he's not explaining to us what the two sides are. Why did he assume in his kasha? Why did he assume in his kasha that a mitzvah should automatically mean you give your life for it? So the most simple way of looking at it is that Tosas didn't really come with this assumption out of nowhere. Tosas came with this assumption because it says v'chai b'hem. Meaning the Gemara tells us the reason you don't give your life because it says v'chai b'hem. So Tosas wanted to use that, I guess, that reveals that we should have understood that you have to give your life for it. Once in his teretz he says that the v'chai b'hem is only there so that you don't learn it out of the other things, then we no longer have that premise. In other words, it wasn't that Tosas himself understood that it's a simple thing. The Torah says not to do something, you got to give your life for it. He only did that because he saw that the Gemara needed v'chai b'hem to teach me that you don't have to give your life, and it must have been that the default position was that you do have to give your life. Now that he has a different way of explaining why we need v'chai b'hem, he no longer has proof that the assumption is that you have to give your life for every mitzvah. In other words, Tosas sort of didn't have an opinion on the matter. It was v'chai b'hem. The fact that we have a pasuk saying v'chai b'hem that teaches you v'chai b'hem v'lo sheyamus b'hem, that misled him in the kasha to think that otherwise I would assume that you do have to die for it. But once he has a different explanation for the pasuk of v'chai b'hem, he is no longer forced to say that. And we can understand who said you have to give your life for it. It was not so simple. What should the default position be? What should we be thinking? If Hashem doesn't say otherwise, what do you think? You do have to die for it or not? Which way do we go? What should the default position have been to a rational human being? It would make sense that Tosas kasha was very solid. Not just because it says v'chai b'hem, but what do we mean by v'chai b'hem v'lo sheyamus b'hem? Is the Torah directing us? No, v'chai b'hem, the purpose of mitzvah is v'chai b'hem, and therefore don't give your life. But without the Torah telling me, why should I not assume that you do have to give your life for it? It seems from Tosas that it's not so straightforward. Yes, that was the way he first wanted to learn v'chai b'hem, and now he learns it otherwise. The proof being Ben Noach, that the Gemara needs the mitzvah v'nigdashti b'sol b'nei Yisrael, that would be the only requirement for a Ben Noach, to give his life, otherwise not. So far we'll leave Tosas at that. Yes, Tosas really wasn't sure. His havamina was that if you need a pasuk of v'chai b'hem to tell me not to give your life, then it must be that when Hashem commands us, it means give your life. And then in his teretz, he has another use for v'chai b'hem. No, it teaches me don't learn it out of, say, avodah zarah and arayas, that we know you have to give your life for. Don't learn it out of there. That's what we need v'chai b'hem. But otherwise, the default position would have been that you don't have to give your life. All right, that's where Tosas come from. Now comes the Rambam, and we wonder, what does the Rambam hold? You start reading the Rambam, it is so interesting. Kol Beis Yisrael Mitzvos Al Kiddush Hashem HaGadol Hazeh. By the way, it says Beis Yisrael. The Mefarshim point out that it's because the Rambam later tells us that in terms of the Gemara's question if a Ben Noach is chayiv in Kiddush Hashem or not, the Rambam holds that he is not. So Kol Beis Yisrael Mitzvos Al Kiddush Hashem. It's only Jews that are chayiv in Kiddush Hashem. Shem HaGadol Hazeh Shenemar V'Nigdashti B'Sol B'nei Yisrael. We also have a mitzvah lo saseh v'lo sechalu v'shem kodshi. Ketzad. How does that play itself out? If a non-Jew tells you, either you break one of the mitzvahs or I will kill you, Yavor va'al yehorek. He should better do the Avera and not allow himself to be killed. Shenemra b'mitzvahs asher yasa osam adam v'achai bohem v'chai bohem v'lo sheyomus behem v'meis v'lo over ezem eschai v'nafsho. You're not even allowed to give your life up. The Rambam's first case of how to fulfill the mitzvah of Ignashni B'Sol B'nei Yisrael is what? You don't have to give your life up. That's an interesting fulfillment of the mitzvah of Ignashni B'Sol B'nei Yisrael. If the mitzvah is to give your life up, the Rambam should tell us the mitzvah is give your life up, but there are cases we don't have to. The Rambam starts otherwise. So you could say that the Rambam is just being very practical. He wants to make sure that he catches you before it's too late and tells you don't give your life up for just a mitzvah, only under certain circumstances. He's got to set the record straight 1 second and says, V'chai ben, the purpose of mitzvahs is to live. Possibly. Look at the Rambam saying something else. But let's ask ourselves, with regard to that question, the difference between Tosas Havamin and Tosas Maskana, Tosas Kash and Tosas Teretz. Tosas began by saying that without V'chai ben, we would have to give our lives up for any mitzvah. Tosas Teretz says no. We only need V'chai ben to teach us that we don't learn the other mitzvahs out of Avodah Zarah and Arayas. But otherwise, the fact that a mitzvah requires you to do the mitzvah doesn't mean you have to give your life for it. And that's why a Ben Noach, if he doesn't have the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, would not have to give his life. All right, so Tosfos went in both directions. His Hava Ben was the mitzvah requires it. His Teretz says it doesn't. Whose side is the Rambam on? Whose side is the Rambam on? It would make sense that if the Rambam held like Tosfos, that the only reason we need V'chai B'hem is so that we don't learn the other mitzvahs out of the cases where you have to give your life. Why is the Rambam bringing V'chai B'hem before he taught us that you have to give your life for anything? If he didn't yet teach us the halacha that you have to give your life not to break Avodah Zarah, so why is he bringing V'chai B'hem? If V'chai B'hem is only telling us, like Tosfos, not to learn the other mitzvahs out of Avodah Zarah. He never told us you have to give your life not to break Avodah Zarah. So why is he bringing V'chai B'hem? Doesn't it sound from the Rambam that the Rambam also said that the default position should have been that every mitzvah requires that you give your life? And V'chai B'hem taught me otherwise. V'chai B'hem taught me no. V'chai B'hem v'lo sheyomus behem. And then he brings the other psukim, and we have other limudim that are mechayiv you to give your life. A straightforward reading of the Rambam would be like that that the Rambam is telling us you need v'chai ben because otherwise your assumption should be that every mitzvah requires that you give your life for it. The problem is, what do we do with Tosfos Kasha and the Gemara and Sanhedrin? So why should it be Noah, who doesn't have a v'chai b'hem? Why doesn't he have to give up his life? So I think the most pashut answer to the Rambam would be, v'chai b'hem is a definition of mitzvahs. And the Rambam actually brings that whole limud there. What does the Rambam say? No, it just brings v'chai b'hem v'lo sheyomus b'hem. Sheneber b'mitzvahs. Asher yas odem ha'odem v'chai b'hem v'lo sheyomus b'hem. The Rambam Pashtus could be learning up that the Torah here defines what a mitzvah is. A mitzvah is how to live. The pasuk that says v'chai b'hem doesn't mean that your life is more important than kiyum ha-mitzvahs. What the Torah is saying is v'chai b'hem teaches you how to live. So obviously, if you're not going to live, then that's not what the mitzvah is teaching you. Tosfos assumes that v'chai b'hem is some kind of revolutionary Kiddush that applies to Jews. Had the Torah not written it, we would never have known it. And it was only given to Jews, and for non-Jews, they're left with that default position. The Rambam, the Pashtus could understand that v'chai b'hem is defining all mitzvahs, whether for Jews or non-Jews. A mitzvah is v'chai b'hem. That's what a mitzvah is, teaching you how to live. In other words, it would be simple to learn up the Rambam. It would be simple to learn up the Rambam that the Rambam remains with Tosfos in his kasha in terms of the default position in all mitzvahs. Had the Torah not written v'chai b'hem, everybody would have to give their life not to transgress. This is true of Jews, this is true of non-Jews for their 7. Comes the Torah v'chai b'hem and defines what a mitzvah is. A mitzvah is meant v'chai b'hem v'lo sheyamus b'hem. A mitzvah is teaching you how to live. And therefore, when there's a question of your life or the mitzvah, that your life comes first, because dying is not what a mitzvah is teaching you to do. It's teaching you how to live. And that applies to a Jew and a non-Jew equally then. And therefore, if a non-Jew would not have had the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, he wouldn't have to give his life for anything. And that's exactly what the Gemara wants to know. Does he have it, does he not have it? Tosfos assumed it's some kind of Kiddush for Jews only. The Ram can easily understand this is true for everybody. V'chai b'hem is defining the purpose of mitzvahs. And for non-Jews, not. So the pashas that the Rambam would be learning, that the fact that there's a mitzvah requires you to give your life for it, were it not for v'chai b'hem. This v'chai b'hem is reveals what mitzvahs are for, whether you're Jewish or otherwise. That would be one way of learning the Rambam. That doesn't quite answer the question of why this is the first example in the Rambam. The first example in the Rambam of a fulfillment of V'nigdashti b'sol b'nei Yisrael. The Rambam in Sefer HaMitzvos gives us a definition of the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem. It's mitzvah tes. Vinyan zos ha-mitzvah, she'anachnu mitzuvim lefarsem ha'emunah zos ha'amitis ba'olam. We have to publicize the truth. The truth of our emunah to the world. V'shelo nefached behezek shum mazik. And we should not be afraid of anything happening to us. Meaning, we should not be cowards. We should be ready to put up with anything for the sake of showing our emunah. Even if someone comes along, some big strong guy, and says, you've got to go and deny Hashem's truth, lo nishma mimenu, we will not worry about him, we will not listen to him. Aval nimsor atzmeinu lemisa v'lo naseu l'asher shekafarnu. Says the Rambam, we will not break the Yisur, we're ready to give up our lives. According to the Rambam, that's the mitzvah of V'nigdashti b'sol b'nei Yisrael. That is the mitzvah of V'nigdashti b'sol b'nei Yisrael. To stand up for your emunah even to the point of giving your life. So here we can go in two directions. One is that the Rambam began by saying V'nigdashti, and although he didn't tell us, but the mitzvah of V'nigdashti requires that you give your life for all the mitzvahs. On that we have a pasuk of V'chai B'hem that limits it. But it begins with V'nigdashti and not with the fact that the mitzvah requires that you give your life for it. In other words, the Rambam could be holding like Tosfos second, like Tosfos teretz, that really a mitzvah doesn't require that you give your life. But V'nigdashti does, but it says V'chai B'hem, so it's limited. See, if we take this approach in Rambam, there would be something very, very nice. And that is, V'nigdashti means stand up for your emunah, even if it means giving up your life. So you should want to do that for all the mitzvahs. Comes the Torah and says, no, you're not allowed to. B'chai b'hem, only certain ones. So right now, if you ask the Jew, why are you transgressing to save your life? Why are you doing this? You know what the answer is? Because Hashem said so. I'm prepared to give up my life, but Hashem told me not to. Not because my life is too dear to me. Hashem doesn't let me. And that's why the Rambam's got to warn us. And if you do give up your life, you're responsible for your own life. This would mean that the Rambam holds that the fact that there's a mitzvah, even before V'chai B'hem, you don't have to give your life for it. V'nigdashti requires you to give your life up. V'chai B'hem then comes and limits that to only certain mitzvahs. And that's why the Gemara is saying that if there's no V'nigdashti for a non-Jew, he wouldn't have to give up his life. That would be a smooth reading of the Rambam, without us having to say that V'chai B'hem now applies to non-Jews too. Right? Which means we have two approaches in Rambam. Rambam can either be holding, like Tosfos in his Kasha, that every mitzvah, by virtue of the fact that it's a commandment, would require to give your life up for it. Comes the Torah and says, V'chai b'hem. So then we have the question of why then would a Ben Noach have to give his life up for it? Why would a Ben Noach not have to give his life up for it? If he doesn't have the mitzvah of V'nigdashti, you'll have to say that the Rambam holds that V'chai b'hem works for non-Jews too, because that's the definition of a mitzvah. The other approach is no. The Rambam says that V'nigdashti requires that we give our lives for it. V'nigdashti requires that we give our lives for it. V'chai b'hem just limits the V'nigdashti. In which case, a Ben Noach, if he doesn't have a V'nigdashti, would not have to give his life for it. And that was the Gemara's question. What makes this a better reading of the Rambam is that's why the Rambam is starting off with the case where you don't give your life, to let us know that that itself is a fulfillment of Vinigdashti. Vinigdashti means the only reason I don't give my life up is because the Torah said, V'chai b'hem, because Hashem doesn't let me. But I should be prepared to give my life up for Kiddush Shem Shamayim. That means that the requirement is not the mitzvah itself. A requirement to give up one's life is not the mitzvah, it's the Vinigdashti, which is limited by V'chai b'hem. And that would work well with Tosfos' second teretz also, except that Tosfos says we need the V'chai b'hem only not to learn it out of anything. The Rambam would just stay. We're not in the question of learning it out of everything else. The mitzvah Vinigdashti means give your life up. The mitzvah Vinigdashti means give your life up. But V'chai b'hem limits it. And then we have the different limudim to tell us what are the things we do give our lives up for. In either Pshat and the Rambam, you go with either one of them, they take us to the same place. Which means, whether the Rambam understands, like Tosfos in his Kasha, that if Hashem gives you a mitzvah, you got to give your life up for it. And you need the Torah to tell me otherwise. Or you're going to learn that according to the Rambam, it's the mitzvah Vinigdashti that requires it. Bottom line, when it comes to any mitzvah, the Jew really should be prepared to give his life up for it. And if he's in a life-threatening situation, and the halacha is that he's not supposed to give his life up for it, because it's not one of those commandments or situations that require it, then why is he not giving his life up? Because the Torah said not to. Because the Torah said not to. So you hear this? The Rama mentions in the halacha later that life-threatening doesn't only mean that there's someone standing over you with a gun. The same thing goes where someone is critically ill and he is required, the doctors say, he's required, say, to eat something non-kosher to save his life. Or to transgress, to do something that will break Shabbos to save a life. So say the person is doing this for himself. What is he supposed to tell himself? I keep Shabbos. I keep kosher. But not when it's life-threatening. No, that's not the attitude. That is not the attitude. The attitude is I'm willing to give my life up, but Hashem doesn't let me. Whether I'm giving my life up because of the mitzvah or because of Vinigdashti, got to be prepared to give your life up for every mitzvah. Torah said, V'chai b'hem, what can I do? Doesn't let me. Do you realize what a shift in attitude this gives us in the way we live and keep all of our mitzvahs? That means with every mitzvah, every positive commandment, every negative commandment. If not for the fact that the Torah said, V'chai b'hem, when I do a mitzvah, I got to feel, I'm really prepared to give my life up for this. This is more important to me than my own life. Hashem doesn't let me die over it, though. I'm restraining myself because that's what Hashem told me. But the preparedness to give my life up for it is there. And that's why, according to the Rambam, it's a fulfillment of Kiddush Hashem. It's a fulfillment of Kiddush Hashem. When you transgress not to die, that's a fulfillment of Kiddush Hashem. Reb Noach in his Chaburas took the position that we have to be prepared to give our lives for every mitzvah, just as a halacha of a chai b'hem. He understood the Rambam like Tosas Kasha. That wasn't just a pshat in the Rambam. This is one of the most important statements about what a Jew is. Our reality is our mitzvahs. Our reality is living by way of what Hashem taught us to live. Our relationship with Hashem, we say this in Shema V'Ahavta Hashem Elokam b'chol lov v'chol nafsh v'chol miyodecha. Our love for Hashem, our feeling of closeness to Hashem is more important to us than absolutely anything else. Okay, what can you do? The Torah said, V'chai b'hem, don't give your life. I'm going to be Makayim, the will of Hashem, and transgress and live. Not because I'm not prepared to give my life up. Prepared to do anything. But Hashem doesn't let. Guys, this is serious. This is serious. You know, we're used to thinking in terms of there's our religious life and then there's practical life. You know, like religion, it adds the spice, gives you meaning, it's uplifting, it's so nice. But then, you know, then there's dollars and cents. And there, 1 second, the practicalities come in and... No. The reality is the 613. The reality is Torah mitzvahs. And that's the reality. At any expense. We're ready for it. Hashem says, V'chai b'hem, no. You have an obligation to live. Other than the exceptions where we know you do have to give your life, which is the rest of the Rambams that I had you read. Other than that, no, V'chai b'hem. Not because of a lack of preparedness. Not because it's more important to you. Because Hashem says, and it's part of Indashti. I'll do anything to listen to him. Torah mitzvahs are real. Practicalities are passing. Torah is eternity. Even life on this planet, yeah, we shall live long, but how long is that? Real life is forever. Our neshamas will be around for all of eternity. And our neshamas only know Torah mitzvahs. They don't know this money thing and this comfort thing. We make every sacrifice. Oh, Mr. Torah doesn't let, but I'm prepared to make any sacrifice. That's the way the Jew has to live. Gotta live with this attitude. You gotta live with this attitude. Then you're real. Then you're real. Then your Torah is real to you. It's not the spice of life. It's not just meaning. This is reality. May this realization in every one of us be an added schus for Noach. And hopefully we can share this with as many people as we can, whether they know nothing or they know a lot. This is something every Jew has to be taught. From or not from. It's so crucial. This is what life is all about.